Okay, this is number 3 on 2021 FRQ. So a high school club maintains information about its members in a member info object. So presumably each member has an instance of the member info class, which is instance of a class same as object. A member info object stores a club member's name, year of graduation, and whether or not the club member is in good standing. If it were me and I were doing it on paper, I'd probably underline that, and that to help me remember what 3 things it's keeping track of. A member who is in good standing has fulfilled all the responsibilities of club membership. And we probably don't care what that is. Okay, member info, a declaration. So it looks like they're giving us the whole class, or at least the part we need to worry about. And of course, implementation not shown. So what in programming we call a black box. We know what it does, we just don't know how it does it. Construct a member info object for club with name, graduation year, and has good standing. So this is a constructor. We can assume there are some sort of fields that correspond to these parameters. But they're not listed, and presumably we don't need to know them. So then get grad year. So it looks like a standard getter method. In good standing, I would have called it get in good standing. For me, I'm so used to get in good standing, I would probably underline that to make sure I don't accidentally use get in good standing. And it's just saying there's other stuff that may not be shown. Okay, club members. So this must be the one that we're writing. So it gives us a field. So we already know there's a field there. We're not writing it. We got to make sure that we access the proper variable name. Also, we see it's not initialized. Now, fields will automatically initialize themselves. If it's an int, it initializes itself to 0, that may be fine. However, with an object, like an array list, it will initialize itself to null. So I got to make sure I initialize this with an array list before I try to add something into it. So if I just try to add something to member list without actually having it point in an array list, I'm going to get a null pointer exception. This null is like it's a pointer, but it's not actually pointing at an object. Okay, so let's see this one. Add members, we pass an array of strings. So that's probably underline that, but it's a little unusual to have a parameter that's an array of strings. Not unusual in that it's a problem, just it's not something I write a lot, so I'd want to make sure I didn't forget that. And then just a standard int grad year. So this must be a way to add members in a batch, but they'd all have to have the same grad year, since there's not an array of ints. If there's an array of ints for grad year, they could each have a different grad year, but since there's a bunch of names and only one grad year, you can only add a list of students with a single grad year at a time. It says precondition names is a non-empty array. That may save us some trouble for checking it, because it could be the code we write would crash if this were an array of size 0, which would mean normally we'd have to check for it. But if they're guaranteeing us it's not empty, we don't have to worry about that. And it might not matter, but preconditions often will help you because it's less situations you have to think about. Okay, add members. So yeah, just says we're going to implement it. Okay, now remove members, or remove members. So this is going to return an array list of member info, and we pass it a year. So what does it do? Removes members who have graduated and returns a list of members who are graduated and are in good standing as described in part B. Okay, so we're going to have to see what that is. And it says this class, there's other stuff, but presumably we don't care about it. Like I'm sure there's a constructor that there may be instance variables constructors that are not shown. So now the question is, since there's a constructor, I would assume the constructor would initialize this. So since we're not writing the constructor, I think we can safely assume that the constructor will initialize this with an array list, because it really doesn't make sense to initialize it in addMembers, because if we do it in addMembers, then it's going to make it, it's going to wipe out the array every time we call it. And here, if we did it here, then it's, it would wipe out way before it removed it. So it must be that this gets initialized in the constructor, which I don't love, because, they aren't telling us explicitly it's going to be initialized. And this is something often in an AP style problem you want to worry about if it's not initialized. But since we're not writing a constructor, I guess We don't have to worry about that. Okay, write the club members method addMembers, which takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is a string array containing the name of the club members to be added. The second parameter is the graduation year of all the new club members. The method adds the new members to member list instance variable. The names can be added in any order. All members added are initially in good standing and share the same graduation year. So I'd probably underline initially in good standing. So let's see, and so we're going to create a member. We're going to create a member info object, pass it that data, and then we're going to add that member info object to this field, and we're going to do that for every index of the array. So I'm going to start it out. They've given us the header here, public void addMembers string names int grad year. Should be on the same line. I just ran out of space. Okay. Okay, so we're going to have to traverse this array of strings. We can do that either with a for loop or a for each loop. I'm going to do it with a for loop. Int I equals 0. I is less than names.length. And it is a array, so it's dot length with no parentheses. If it were a string, it would be, I'm sorry, if it was a string, yeah, it would be dot length with that, parentheses. And if it were an array list, it would be dot size. I plus plus. All right, so we're going to traverse it. Now, we need to make some new member infos. Now, you can do this. You could do the contents of the for loop all in one line. I prefer to do it in 2 lines, and I believe the canon answer did it in 2 lines too. Member info, I don't know, let's call it temp equals new member info. Okay, now I'm going to have to go back up and see what is the order it takes this stuff in. It takes first name, so I'm going to say the first argument is going to be names index I. Then the second one is grad year, which is going to be whatever grad year was passed. And then the third one is going to be is in good has good standing, and that's always going to be true for new members. So we're going to say true, and we're not putting in quotation marks. If we put in quotation marks, it would be a string. This is a primitive Boolean, true. And again, if we put T for true, that would be something different. It would think it's a variable. But true is a value. Okay, so now that we've created it, we need to add it to our field is member list dot add, and we're going to add temp. We're going to add the temp one, and then we come all the way back around once we're done, make a new one, add it to the temp, and then or make a new one, put it in temp, and then add it to the array list. And that, I believe, is all we need to do, right? Yep. So that is going to be it. So now let's look at part B. Write club members method, the club members method, remove members, which takes the following actions. Returns a list of all students who have graduated and are in good standing. A member is graduated if member's graduation year is less than or equal to the method's year parameter. Okay. I would probably underline that to myself, or underline that for myself. If no members meet this criteria, an empty list is returned. Removes from member list all members who have graduated regardless of whether they're not in good standing. So it removes all of them, but it only adds them to the list to be returned if they are in good standing. So it removed 2 members here, but only put Steve Fox in the array list because Michael Zinn was not in good standing. Okay, so let's start this here. Public array list of member info. So that means we're returning an array list of member info. That's our return type. Remove members int year. Okay, so I would somehow make a note to myself. I might point to array list to remind myself I was returning an array list. not an array, because there's arrays in other parts, and it's very easy when you're dealing with arrays and array lists to figure out which one you're trying to do. Okay, so we've got to go through, we've got to traverse, well, first of all, we have to make a variable that's going to hold the members that we're going to be returning. So let's start by making an array list, member info, let's see, I'm going to say RGS, removed good standing, equals new array list of member info. So I've declared and initialized it, because if I don't initialize it, if a local variable won't initialize itself. So, you know, it would, if I tried to add, it wouldn't even run the program, because it would say, hey, RGS may not have been initialized. Okay, so now I have to traverse the list. Now, there's two ways we can do this. Since you have to be careful when you're removing members from an array list while you're traversing it. Because, for example, I'm just going to talk about why you have to be careful when you're traversing an array list and removing stuff. Let's say I've got, and again, since arrays, they're a constant size, you really can't remove an index. You can set it to null or something, or you can put something else in it. So let's say I've got three things. We'll just say A, B, C. So these are the three things. Now this index 0, 1, 2. So if let's say I go to, you know, I've got I'm traversing a list and I have A. I started A. Oh, I don't want A, I remove it. So then let's say my I was 0. Okay, so I checked, I removed it. So okay, now at the end of the loop I increment it to 1. But B is now 0 and C is now 1. So then when I increment it to 1, now I'm looking at C. So I skipped over B. So there's two ways to handle it. Either you can, every time you remove something, you decrement I. So that makes up for incrementing it. So you're actually looking at the same index, but you're looking at the variable that slid into the previous index. Or you start at the end and go to the beginning, in which case it doesn't matter if you remove one, because again, you're going backwards. So removing one only affects the ones after it, not the ones before it. I think I'm going to just, the simplest way is to start at the end and go to the beginning, but I feel like I'd rather start at the beginning and go to the end, and I'm just going to remember to decrement it I every time. So I'm going to say I is less than, I is less than, and what is our field called again? Our field that we are traversing is called member list. Member list.size. And again, you want to know how to get the size of an array list? Check the cheat sheet. I++. Okay, so now what we've got to do is we have to check if it's a grad year where we're going to even consider dealing with it. Because if it's not the grad year that we're looking to remove, we don't even have to do anything. If it is, then we have to decide if they are in good standing or not. Okay, so I'm going to say if, again, it's member list we're looking at. Member list.get index I, and again, check your cheat sheet to see how to access array lists. If that get index I, so that's pulling out an instance, that's pulling out an object. But we need to go further. We need to, now that we have that object, we need to figure out what is the grad year. So we've got this member info object, and we got to call get grad year. So we pulled out the object, now we're pulling out the grad year. Now I want to know, is that less than or equal to year? Because if we haven't run this year, there might be people who graduated 1, 2, 3 years ago are still in here, and we need to pull them out. Okay. So in this case, we are definitely pulling them out. We may or may not be adding them to the list to be returned, because we've got to figure out if they're in good standing. Okay. So let's see. So I'm going to say if. So I got to pull them out again. pull out the object at I, but then I gotta use a different getter method. I'm gonna say in good standing. And I'm glad I made a point to myself that, hey, it's not get in good standing. It's in good standing. Okay, so if they are in good standing, so we could either leave it like this, it's already a Boolean, or some people prefer to just do with that because they find it clear. But it's already going to be true or false. So if they are in good standing, I'm going to use squigglies. You don't have to if there's just one line under an if, but I'm going to use it. Then we need to add them to RGS. So RGS.add. So what are we adding? Well, first we got to get it again. So we got to get what was in index I from member list because we found that they're in good standing, and then we add them to that. Now what we need to do is we need to remove. So remove, and not remove from RGS, remove from the original list. So we're going to say member list dot add, or I'm sorry, dot remove index I. Now I added them to this list first because once they're removed, unless I store it, and I could have stored it in a variable. Since I'm not storing it in a variable, they're gone. So that's why I added them first. Now, anytime we remove somebody, we got to decrement I because that'll cancel out the incrementing on the next cycle because the person after them will slide into their space. Now, if we're not removing them, we just advance like normal. But basically, if we remove them, we have to cancel this out since, again, we're going in from beginning to end instead of end to beginning. Okay, so we removed them, we decremented, and then we get through the for loop, and finally, don't forget, remove, return, and people do forget this, never forget to return. In fact, I often like to really call attention to the return type because that, put a couple arrows there, that makes sure I don't forget I'm supposed to return something. Or even so as a void. Sometimes it's a void method and people, return something. And I'm just telling you, when I have done these myself for practice, I'm telling you mistakes I have made and the things I do to make sure I don't make them again. RGS, return RGS. Okay, and that's our list of removed. And let's double check, make sure that's everything we need it to do. Okay, in good standing. Okay, looks good.